Hello and welcome to Newsclick's International Roundup. The past 2 weeks have seen some major developments in Syria, including the downing of a Russian aircraft and the Russia-Turkey summit on the future of Idlib. To talk more about this, we have with us Prabir Purkayastha, Editor-in-Chief, Newsclick. Hello, Prabir. So, Prabir, in the last International Roundup, we looked at the immediate aftermath of the downing of the Russian aircraft. And Russia did point out that Israel was indirectly to blame on this. So how do you see the developments that have happened after this, including the delivery of the S300 anti-aircraft systems to Syria?
We had, I think, predicted last time that this is going to have consequences for Israel in Syria. It will not be consequences which a lot of the other media were talking about, maybe clashes, Russia doing something in Israel and so on. We said there are going to be larger shift in the picture, which will be more strategic than an immediate military response. And I think that's what we are starting to see unfold in Syria. You've talked about the S300 deliveries. Now, these were earlier promised to Syria, but Israel had asked Russia not to deliver them. And Russia seemed to have postponed the delivery for quite some time. After the downing of the Illusion 20, and again, this whole issue is how much of who's to blame we can discuss, but clearly Israel had a major role in this. And the fact that the Syrian Air Force defense struck the Illusion 20 by mistake still doesn't take away from the fact that there was Israeli provocation, there were Israeli strikes, and they had given the information to Russians about the strike only 1 minute before the strike. So if Israel was seeking favors from Russia in terms of not delivering S-300s, then to violate their agreement that they will give warning to Russia before any strike on Syria, this is something they have not kept. So their end of the bargain has not been kept. Now, S-300 is a game changer, of course. It's not as advanced as S-400, but let's face it, given the theater that we're talking about, given the kind of air force that Israel has that we are talking about, S-300 is really 2 notches, 3 notches higher than whatever Syria has at this point. So I think that is one game changer, but that's not the only one. They've also said over the Latakia Tartus area, they have said they are not going to allow any flights by any hostile aircraft in that region. So that's a second major game changer. And any strikes taking place from the ocean, the Mediterranean Sea at that bordering Tartus-Latakia coastline, which strikes at Syria, or any aircraft in that region which is capable of strikes, they are going to jam. So they are saying 2 more things than just the delivery of S-300. They're also talking of no-fly zone virtually over that entire region. That's a significant move. And when they say no-fly region, it's not only Israeli aircraft, but all other aircraft, that is NATO, United States, of course, and so on. So that's a major move by Russia. And that's because they have bases over there. And if they allow the flights to take place in that area, Illusion 20 kind of things might take place again. Illusion 20 is a reconnaissance of aircraft. So it really does a monitoring of the large of that area. So that is a major change. The fact they're also threatening to jam all communication in that area is also a very interesting development because A, Russia seems to have advanced jamming capabilities. And the other part, which other commentators have noted, that NATO is not used to flying without GPS, without all the support that the wireless systems provide. So for them to fly blind, as it were, is not something they're used to doing. Well, Russians do seem to practice flying without any support of this kind. So for NATO to operate, if it is jammed, it would be a very significant disadvantage. And the fact that Russia has advanced jamming capabilities, I think, is a major issue, would be a major issue for any moves to strike Syria from the Mediterranean Sea. As we know, that's where a lot of the strikes originate from. And the fact that on the border, on the seashore, which is really Latakia, Tartus, that whole area, now they've said they will not allow overflights. So I think these 3 things taken together, Israel's wings are being clipped. And I think their ability to attack Syria again and again, they have used the Lebanese airspace for doing that. They have used Mediterranean Sea for doing that. They have overflown over Syria, but much less in recent times. Given all these developments, I think more than NATO, because NATO is really not at the moment regularly involved except for few strikes against what they call chemical weapons used by Syria, which we have discussed is basically a way to get NATO into the game. But Israel has been much more active, claiming there are Iranian forces over there and they have the extraterritorial right to attack Iranian forces anywhere in Syria. I think that part of it has changed significantly with the Russian response to the downing of the Illusion 20.
And this also, I suppose, marks an end to this whole campaign that there has been some sort of a backdoor channel between Israel and Russia, and they're sort of coming closer towards an alliance, which has been a campaign consistently put forward by some of their advocates, with Netanyahu meeting Putin, for instance.
You know, the Israel-Russian relationships has been, shall we say, complex one. While Russia has supported Syria, they have not really taken a direct oppositional stance to Israel. And the fact that Russia was in that sense an interlocutor between Israel and Syria meant that, if you remember, when they were trying to move towards Dara, and there was this issue that if you go towards Dara, Al-Suwaida and all those areas, that it is too close to the Israeli border, and therefore this would endanger Israel. Therefore, Israel might react. But the fact is that that could not have been done without Russia mediating between Syria and Israel and saying that, look, let them come up to the Golan Heights. We'll ensure that they don't come to Golan. We'll also ensure that Iranian troops are not there. And Israel actually allowed that to happen without militarily intervening, which they were threatening to do earlier. So it has both aspects to it, but the fact is that this was a crossing of a certain red line. And this is why a senior Air Force general was dispatched to Moscow to try to pacify the Russians. But Russians, as you know, they play the longer game, so they don't respond immediately. But they have responded, as the defense minister had said earlier, suitably. Right. And I think this is more their reaction, that we don't want 15 bodies, give us 15 bodies of yours. That's not the way they react. But they react much more strategically. And that's what they seem to have done over here.
And moving on to another aspect concerning Russia. So on September 18th, I believe, Russia and Turkey had signed an agreement, so to speak, or made a pact, basically regarding the conflict in Idlib. And the strategy seems to be to basically postpone to lead to the postponement of the attack the Syrian government was planning for now, with the understanding that Turkey would encourage some of the militant groups or make sure some of the militant groups disperse. So how do you see the situation in Idlib planning out now?
If you want to look at the Idlib scenario, Idlib is only one part of the Syrian larger theater, you will see that over the last 2 years, we have had a sea change in the map. That effectively now there are two pockets where you have what would be called Al-Qaeda and Free Syrian Army, whatever they may be. The very serious questions whether the Free Syrian Army has been anything but a front for other militancies, essentially ISI or Al-Qaeda, ISIS or Al-Qaeda. But if you leave that out, there are only these two pockets that you can see at the top and bottom. And the Al-Tanaf pocket is really backed by the fact there is a US NATO force over there. So Idlib is a last, in that sense, resistance of the Al-Qaeda and Free Syrian Army. As I said, who those unicorns are, we don't talk about that. Other than that, you have the east of Euphrates, you have the desert, which is therefore looks very large but sparsely populated. And there you have the Kurdish forces and their allies, supported by the United States, very clear, supported by the United States. They are there, but it is not a densely populated area. So this is one of the at reasons why Syria has not concentrated on that area. The real issue is at the moment Idlib, where all the Al-Qaeda forces which have been pushed out from other parts of Syria have congregated there, in some sense under the Turkish umbrella, if you will. So this is the picture over there. Now, given the fact that you have US in the fray, you have Israel trying to create a military, shall we say, situation over Syria, given all of it, I think Russia has said, let's try and see whether we can keep Turkey with us and use our good offices to see whether Turkey will slowly help in resolving the Idlib situation. Now, it is true that Turkey may have ambitions over Idlib, making it a kind of quasi-protectorate. But it is also true that at the moment, Turkey's relationship with the United States being what it is, that they wouldn't like to burn their bridges with both US and Russia. So Russia has some, shall we say, leverage over there. I think the more important question is, there was originally a peace process in which Russia was virtually not invited, though it was temporarily might be considered there. It is true that Assad never had a place in that discussion, and it was being held under the UN aegis, where the Free Syrian, so-called Free Syrian Army was being represented. Al-Qaeda came in wearing different hats. Different kinds of forces were there. It was Saudi Arabia, Qatar, other Gulf states which are negotiating on behalf of these forces. And if you remember, in all the United Nations discussions, it was Assad must go was the sort of demand being raised, that any peace process has to be without Assad. So now the US is still saying that is the only place they will consider a legitimate discussion on Syria can take place. And they do not recognize the Astana process, which involves Turkey, Russia, Iran, Syria, and the regional powers. So the fact that Turkey has not gone with the United Nations, but is still continuing engaging with Russia and of course Syria and Iran, means that the UN process is virtually dead. So unless Turkey goes back there, the UN, or shall we say the US-led UN process has no chance on the ground. So I think for Russia to keep them out of the UN process, because UN process, as we know, with all the NATO powers being there, their demand was the peace means that Assad has to go. And this is unlikely to happen in Syria today, not with the Syrian government in control of most of the populations, except in the Idlib area. So with that as a background, I think we have to see the Astana process or these discussions was really that Russia saying, let's hold off on Idlib, let's see whether we can resolve the situation with Turkey, how much we can resolve the situation, but let's not at the moment have a breach with Turkey. But the breach has been with Israel. If there was, as I said, the complex relationship with Israel and Russia seems to have ruptured at the moment. Of course, geostrategically, it was always going to be a problem because in Syria, Israel and the Syrian government were on opposite sides. So I think with that, we should see Idlib take a longer time. But I think the days of Al-Qaeda and Idlib are numbered. Whether it will lead to Syrian government regaining its control over Idlib in the near future, we have to wait and watch. And how much will still Turkey play a role over there after Al-Qaeda is defanged or dispossessed or liquidated? We don't know what Turkey wants to do over there. That we'll have to see. But I don't think there is going to be an immediate offensive. It's been certainly postponed, but has the situation changed dramatically with Turkey joining the process? We don't really know, because at the moment nobody knows what Turkey's real intentions in Idlib are, and I don't know whether President Erdogan himself knows what his intentions in this area are. Is it the neo-Ottoman revival over Idlib and maybe parts of Iraq? Is it something else? We have to see. For Turkey, the major issue is not Idlib. For Turkey, the major issue is really the Kurdish autonomous area on the border of Turkey, and they are the ones who would like to get help to resolve this issue, and they now need Syria, Russia, Iran's help to really solve that problem So whether two problems will solve each other, they will compound each other, is something we have to see. What's important is US is no longer a major player with Turkey in this, and something which we have been always arguing is preferable, that regional powers sit down and decide what they have to do. They have the maximum stake over there. US should not be having a major stake in this area, because apart from stirring the pot and creating more arms sale, there is really no major strategic stake that US can have in this region. They create all the stakes in this region because there is oil and because there is Israel. These are the two reasons why they claim that is where their security lies. It's very difficult to understand how US security lies across the Atlantic Ocean.
Thank you, Prabir. That's all we have time for today. Keep watching Newsclick.